Hello, it's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist, and we've got Jen Peebles and Russell Glasser here dealing with Theist, who is about to explain why he believes in God. So let's go with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, so like I was saying, I looked into there's so many.
Look,
We go into all the arguments and all the.
No, just your best piece of evidence that your God exists.
I just want to add that we've been on this call for a while, so...
Now, this is one of the things that annoys me about Russell, and to be honest with you, I'm glad he's gone because he does it so often. He allows a caller to come on, spends 20 minutes arguing about nothing at all, and then near the end of the call, somebody like Jen will say, define your God and provide evidence. And then Russell says, oh, but we've only got 2 minutes left in the call. I mean, when you've got to a situation where a theist has been asked the question, you've got to allow them to answer. I really wish they would ask this at the beginning and not at the end of the call.
Okay,
so we may have to cut it short soon, but...
Sure, I'll say something real quick. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things I find convincing is that when you ask... why is there something rather than nothing, or why is there any kind of existence? And I don't mean why is there this particular universe, because there's scientific ways of talking about that, but why is there anything at all? It leads to an infinite regress.
No, I mean, I think, and for people who aren't watching the video, I'm holding up this book again.
No, I don't think the question, why is there anything at all, leads to an infinite regress. What leads to an infinite regress is the question of causation, that everything must have a cause. So I think that he's kind of mixed up a bit there.
Again, whose title is We Have No Idea, which is a perfectly legitimate answer and not a reason to, but not a reason.
That's funny. He says exactly. We've got no idea, so just plug a God into the gap.
To jump to a conclusion about a God.
I'm not jumping. To me, it's not a jump. It's all I'm saying is that in the sense that.
No, by the way, it is a jump. It is most definitely a jump because he's not provided the logical steps which takes him to his God.
The idea of something that doesn't have a cause. In other words, you come to an infinite regress when you ask why is there anything.
And does God have a cause?
No, I'm not saying that God has or doesn't have a cause, but I'm saying that aspect, that aspect of reality is there and doesn't go away.
So you yourself are...
Well, I'd like to ask the question, what's wrong with an infinite regress? Can it necessarily be demonstrated that an infinite regress is impossible?
Still winding up at a position of we have no idea, but before you get to that point, you feel like you have to inject this extra thing.
No, I'm saying that's what has most traditionally been the response to why is there anything at all? Why is there what Aristotle said? The prime mover. I'm just going back to the oldest approach.
So why does that? But the thing is, why does that lead you to the conclusion that some God exists?
Well, that's a good question because he's referring really to the cosmological argument, and as many philosophers have noted, the cosmological argument at best gets you to this so-called unmoved mover. Who says that unmoved mover has to be a benevolent God?
Well, I'm saying that's what I'm saying, that to the extent that there is something that exists without a cause, I'm calling that God.
Right. Well, we don't think that a God that isn't well defined is...
Yeah, so he's saying that to the extent that something exists which hasn't got a cause, he's calling that God. But he's not really added any kind of definitional detail there. And it just comes back to what I said, that this unmoved mover could be it could be a non-personal force of some kind. It could be an evil God. Who's to say that, with all the evil that we've got going on in the world, I sometimes think that if there is a God, maybe there is an evil God. And he is somewhere laughing his head off at all the suffering that's being caused. Why not?
Is in any way useful as an explanation. But maybe you could mull that over and call back next time, and we can talk to you again.
There's been thousands of pages defining it, so that would just be your opinion.
Yeah, but you've already rejected a lot of those. Yeah, you say there's thousands of pages, but you started this call by saying that you don't believe it's literally true, which doesn't give us a lot of.
There are not thousands of pages. Obviously, there have been attempts by philosophers in the past to define this unmoved mover, but it certainly doesn't stretch over thousands of pages. What they've spent thousands of pages over, people like William Lane Craig, obviously I think he wrote his thesis on the Kalam cosmological argument. Yeah, thousands of pages have been written arguing about the legitimacy of this particular argument, but not on the definition.
Information to go on.
The Bible. I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm talking about Aristotle. I'm talking about philosophy.
Aristotle wasn't all that authoritative either. He had some good original ideas, but he
anything about him being authoritative. I didn't say he was authoritative. I didn't say that. But you said that it's ill-defined, and I'm saying...
Yeah, well, he implied it because obviously Aristotle was a very important philosopher, and he cited Aristotle when invoking the unmoved, the prime mover. So clearly he does think that Aristotle is an authority. Otherwise, why cite him?
There's been thousands of words written about defining what the unmoved mover...
Well, it's not quantity, is it? It's quality. It's the quality of the arguments and quality of the evidence.
Is or the prime mover, so it's not ill-defined.
But an answer can be very old and traditional and still wrong.
Yeah, and the thing is, I don't care about all those other definitions of the unmoved mover or whatever. I only care about what you think.
That's what I think.
Okay.
We still have no idea what that is because you've not actually defined it.
Just look up unmoved mover.
No, I'm not.
I've read about unmoved mover. It's not a good argument.
Yeah.
No, in your opinion, it's not. But you said it wasn't defined.
Like I said, we got a limited amount of time on the show, so we're going to move on to another caller. But you're welcome to call back again.
Yeah, unmoved mover.
Thanks.
Yep.
We know.
Okay, I've done a bit of research on unmoved mover, and I've also got this. Atheism, a Philosophical Justification, Michael Martin, written in 1990, which is absolutely incredible. There's a very good chapter here on the cosmological argument, and he does actually speak about this unmoved mover. So he's commenting that the cosmological argument is actually probably the most common argument that people go to, Christians in particular, that there could not be an infinite regress and that there has to be something which started it all off, which in itself was uncaused. So this is this unmoved mover, which I believe Aristotle first talked about. So I'll just read the basic argument here. In its simplest form, the cosmological argument is this: everything we know has a cause, but there cannot be an infinite regress of causes, so there must be a first cause. This first cause is God. So yeah, he goes. Martin goes on to say that at its very best, as many others have said, including Matt, for example, at best the cosmological argument gets you to a first cause. It doesn't get you to a God. And this first cause, who's to say what it could be? But he highlights various other problems, which I've alluded to in this particular clip, namely about this impossibility of there being an infinite regress. People who cite this argument typically include within it that you cannot possibly have an infinite regress. This hasn't been demonstrated. Now, what theists will say is that, let's have a look, it's obvious or self-evident that there cannot be an infinite regress. And Martin's saying here, from a historical point of view, any appeal to obviousness or self-evidence must be regarded with suspicion, for many things that have been claimed to be self-evidently true, for example, the divine right of kings and the earth as the center of the universe, have turned out not to be true at all. So, moving back to this infinite regress. Now, William Lane Craig is actually in this book, which actually surprised me. I didn't realize William Lane Craig had been going so far. This was written in 1990, And Martin is actually citing Craig because he goes through the main cosmological arguments, and he does actually spend some time on Craig's Kalam cosmological argument. Now, Craig, with this infinite regress, what he says, because obviously with the infinite regress, it's not enough to say it's self-evident or it's obvious that it couldn't be possible. Craig recognizes the need to actually demonstrate that it is impossible. And what he does is he brings an example of a library which has got an infinite number of books in it, right? So imagine you've got this library, you've got an infinite number of books, and each book has got a number. And obviously what he says is that because an infinite number of natural numbers have been used up on each of these books, if you try and add a new book to the library, you wouldn't have a number for it. Yeah, so Martin's solution to this is he doesn't see it as a problem, because he says that you can add a new book to the library and just simply take a number from an existing book. That book then would obviously not have a number, but then you could borrow it. You could borrow it from another book, and so on. I'm not really sure to what extent Craig's Library of Infinite Books is actually a valid critique on the notion that there could not be an infinite regress of causes. The Library of Infinite Books, it strikes me that if the books have got any numbers at all, that they could be put into a sequence. So for example, the 10 millionth book, you could trace back all the way to the first book, which obviously would then not be an infinite regress of numbers anyway, because you would be back to number 1. So in addition to that, of course, I appreciate it's a conceptual idea to prove a philosophical point, a logical point, but at the same time, all the examples of libraries that we've got are finite libraries. They're not infinite libraries. Libraries need a beginning. A first book is added to the library. So I don't know. I'm not really convinced by Craig's Library of Infinite Books. So, but I think the main thing for me is that with the cosmological argument, the unmoved mover doesn't get you to a god. It could be an unmoved mover of a nature of which we're not aware, which may not be anything like a god. So in terms of an atheist rejecting theism, I don't think that the cosmological argument is going to convince any atheist that there is a god. Only at best that there's a first cause. So, well, that's all for now. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts about that, particularly Craig's Library of Infinite Books. I'll be back again soon with another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.